Hit the button. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone to this licensing subcommittee. We will now elect a chair for the meeting. Do I have a proposal from one of the members of the subcommittee, please?
I propose Councillor Les Fry as chair.
And I'll second Councillor Les Fry as chair.
Thank you both. Do we have any apologies for this meeting?
Great. Apologies for absence were received from Councillor David Taylor and Mike Dyer, substituted by Councillor Emma Parker and John Andrews.
Thank you, John. Do any of the councillors have any declarations of interest? None from me.
I have done.
None from me. Thank you. Do you have any urgent business?
There are no urgent items.
Thank you, John. Right, we'll do some introductions now. I am Councillor Les Fry, representing Dorchester West.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Emma Parker and I represent Puddletown and Lower Winterbourne.
And I'm Councillor John Andrews and I represent Sherborne East.
Thank you, team. Right, we're going to go around the room now so everybody knows who everybody is to introduce. Laura, if you'd like to start, please.
Good afternoon, I'm Laura Autry from Legal Services.
Hello, I'm John Miles from Democratic Services. I'll be taking the minutes.
My name is Kate Critchhaw and I'm Senior Democratic Services Officer.
I'm Catherine Miller, Senior Licensing Officer and author of the report.
Hello, I'm Aileen Powell, I'm the Licensing Team Leader.
I'm Darren Narain, I'm the Environmental Health Officer from Dorset Council.
My name is Joe Barnett, I'm the Event Promoter and the Event Director.
I'm Gareth Hance, I'm the Acoustic Consultant for We Out Here.
My name is Matthew Phipps. I'm from TLT Solicitors and I'll be presenting the application this afternoon.
I'm Claire Goodchild and I'm the project lead for We Out Here Festival.
Sorry, my name is Tony Lithgow, I'm a local resident.
Good afternoon. I'm Richard Burden. I'm the Principal Landscape and Planning Officer for Cranbourne Chase, Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty.
Thank you, everyone. Right, I'm now going to ask the report author to outline the details of the notice, please, and the application.
Thank you, Chairman. This hearing is to consider a new premises licence application for We Out Here Festival, Wimborne St Giles. Environmental Health have requested a number of conditions which are detailed in the report and the applicant has agreed to these if the licence were to be granted. Since the writing of the report, the conditions that Dorset Police were requesting have been agreed to be added to the licence if it were to be granted. These conditions were sent out to everybody yesterday as supplementary information too. The conditions also included a change to the hours for the sale of alcohol. These have now been agreed to the following times. So Wednesday is 1400 to 2300, Thursday 11 to 0300 hours, Friday 11 to 0400 hours, Saturday 11 to 0400 hours, Sunday 11 to 0300 hours. Alcohol on Friday and Saturday to be 0400 hours and 0500 hours for 2024 and beyond with a prior written permission of Dorset Police. There were 4 representations against the application received from members of the public. One of the representations was from Cranbourne Chase, Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. The AONB focus was on matters which are material considerations to planning and do not relate to the 4 licensing objectives. However, as the site is in an AONB area, the licence authority will need to have regard to this fact as set out in section 85 of the Crow Act. The 4 representations can be found at Appendix 5. Following these representations, the event organisers wrote to the interested parties to answer the points they had raised, etc., and these can be found at Appendix 6. There were 3 representations in support of the application, and one of these was from the Parish Council. These reps can be found at Appendix 7. The event organisers have also engaged and attended with the Council Safety Advisory Group, or known as SAG. Members of this group include Highways and Environmental Health. The group helps organisers promote best practice in holding events, among other things. I'd like to remind members that the options available to them are to grant the licence, subject to conditions as the authority considers appropriate for the promotion of the licence objectives and the mandatory conditions, to exclude from the scope of a licence any of the licensable activities to which the application relates, to refuse to specify a person in the licence as a designated premises supervisor, or to reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Colleagues, do you have any questions for Catherine?
No questions.
I'd like to hand over to the applicant, please.
So thank you very much. What I propose to do is essentially take you through the... Sorry, do you want me to pause?
Do you have any questions for Catherine at this point?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we will give everybody a chance to ask the questions in a minute as we go around.
So thank you. So what I propose to do... Sorry.
I thought I covered that. Yeah. Do you have any questions for Catherine at this time?
No, I don't. Thank you very much for the offer.
Mr. Lithgow, do you have any questions at this time?
No, not at this time, no. I'll reserve my right to speak later. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So what I propose to do with your permission is essentially walk you, although I probably mean canter you through the bundle of papers that are in front of you. I can see that the bundle of papers that I've got, in a slightly old-fashioned way, seems to be the only bundle of papers in the room. Everybody else is on a screen. I would like to apologise for that from the outset, but I'm obviously it's paginated the report, and there's a variety of appendices and so forth. So I'm going to go in the order of the report, which hopefully is helpful to all. First of all, just some observations from the report itself. At paragraph 1.2 of the report, there is comprehensive detail of the location, and I suspect it is as well known to the committee as anyone. And the festival comes here having previously been in Huntingdonshire, and seeks to effectively move itself, for want of a better phrase, to this auspicious location. On paragraph 1.8 of the report part, you will see that Dorset Police served a representation, and as you would expect, we have been engaged in a dialogue with them for some significant time, both actually before we submitted the application and following, and there is a suite of conditions that we have agreed with the police that I'll come to in some detail further on as we move through the report. There is at paragraph 1.9 detail about the environmental protection representation. I see that the officer is here, so I don't want to steal his thunder, but I think a fair summary, I'm sure I'll be corrected if this is wrong, is that the officer requested that some specific conditions attached to the licence itself, and those are set out on pages 11 and 12 of the report through to effectively paragraph 1.10, and that's set out, I think, comprehensively in Appendix 4. On page 13, there's detail about the representations, 4 from members of the public objecting to the application. And as you have heard at Appendix 6, there is a comprehensive letter that Mr. Barnett sent out to each of the representors. Fair that I flag that I think 2 responded and explained that they would like to maintain their representation, as they're perfectly entitled to do. Paragraph 1.5 highlights that there are 3 representations, 2 from members of the public, and one of whom has been good enough to come along today, and you can hear from Mr. Lithgow in due course. One that I am bound to draw your attention to from the parish council. As a licensing solicitor who does a lot of this sort of work up and down the country, I'm very used to the parish council and parishioners being on that side of the room. I'm not terribly used to them being on this side of the room, and I'm sure you will take account of that when later you come to your deliberations. Paragraph 1.6 explains a little bit about the Safety Advisory Group, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. Effectively, it's the responsible authorities plus, for want of a better phrase. So highways, as an example, often the blue light services that extend beyond the police and the fire service are engaged. And there was a meeting in November with them to introduce our proposals on a preliminary basis, to chat through what we were proposing and so forth. That there are no responsible authorities objecting to this application is obviously a point that I will be inviting you to consider, and a point, frankly, of some significance. When you come to retire, your legal advisor will no doubt bring to your attention paragraph 9.12 of the national guidance that effectively observes that the responsible authorities are the likely experts in their field in your locality, and I would invite you to the conclusion that both the lack of representation from some, but perhaps better evidence, the engagement and the satisfaction of the officers to proposals with amendments perfectly properly engaged in a dialogue across is again a point to reflect upon in the deliberations. The area of outstanding natural beauty obviously are represented. That's some comment in the officer's report at paragraph 1.19. I'm grateful to Catherine for bringing to your attention that a number of the matters might fairly be described as planning matters rather than licensing matters. But I do make the point unashamedly that the ecology report that is contained within your papers, and which I will just take you to in due course, doesn't say, well, they're planning matters or they're not relevant to licensing. It engages on the points that you will have, and residents and the association will have concern about, and I hope that you can see that's been done transparently and perfectly properly. The point that I would make, however, about the CROW Act, I haven't actually heard it called that before, but it's a good acronym, is that you must have regard to it. What it doesn't offer, respectfully, is a veto or some sense of prohibition that entertainment or activities of this sort are not allowed within these areas. You must have regard to it, of course, and we'll look at the representation in due course, but having regard to something is not the same as saying that you are obliged in any way to refuse the application. The licensing objectives, and your policy sets this out, and you'll have seen my written submissions just touching on some of the paragraphs that I'd invite your attention toward, makes clear, as does the guidance, and frankly so does the legislation, that it is the promotion of the licensing objectives with which we're engaged today, and in the sense that the area of outstanding natural beauty engages one of the licensing objectives, it's public nuisance. It's not, if you forgive me for saying so, any impact whatsoever. It's, is the effect of this event going ahead likely to undermine the licensing objective of public nuisance? We self-evidently say not, and that there is some impact, or likely to be some impact, is by no means the same as accepting the public nuisance objective would in any way be undermined. So moving past the report, There is at Appendix 1, actually, is the historic Huntingdonshire licence. I'm not going to delay you with that. Each application to be considered on its individual merits, as you will all be familiar with that phrase from the guidance and your policy. Appendix 2, the licence application, and then past the licensing application itself, also in Appendix 2, at page 55 of the report is the dynamic and, fair to say, draft event safety management plan. That is effectively an overview document of all of the plans, protocols, procedures and measures that will go into manage, govern and control this event. And within the licensing application, there are a suite of conditions that touch on the event safety management plan. I hope you'll be pleased to hear, I'm not planning on taking you through this document line by line, but I would invite your attention toward the table of contents on page 56 of your report as a means of just illustrating the comprehensive nature of the document and all that goes into the planning by a professional, experienced applicant. And over the page, at page 4 of the report, page 58 of your report, are the operational documents which run to 32 specific plans, protocols, policies and procedures. Again, I'm not planning on taking you through each of those, but I would suggest that it is a comprehensive list of everything that you, and more importantly perhaps prior to today, the responsible authorities would consider to be signifying a well thought through, well proposed, well planned operation and event. Going through the documents to Appendix 3, page 85 of your report, that's the police representation. I'll come back to the conditions discussed. Environmental health set out effectively at Appendix 4, and there's really sort of two parts to that as far as I understand it. The first is the list of conditions that are proposed by the officer and effectively agreement to those conditions and the officer's subsequent satisfaction with those conditions, if you're minded to grant, being attached to the licence in the public nuisance objective element. We move then into Appendix 5. The first, perhaps counterintuitively, but the first representation is representation number 2, and that highlights some road safety aspects and concerns. And you will have seen in the supplementary bundle number 2 that a summary traffic management plan has been included to highlight the primary measures and to candidly give you transparency that these matters have been thought about and are being planned. I should add that highways were at the original Safety Advisory Group meeting in November. So the dialogue and the discussions, the exchange of the protocols and the procedures has been ongoing with them for some months, and obviously with the police as well. But it is not something about which they are blissfully unaware, and it wouldn't be fair if it were suggested that they were not engaged because they were absent any knowledge about the proposals. Page 97-98, Appendix 5, Representation 3, touches on traffic, light pollution and noise pollution. I'm going to come on to light pollution and noise pollution, but I'll say this just on the point about traffic. The site self-evidently has to be accessed safely by all. It's a large site, so the first point, if I may say, in our favour here is that we can turn vehicles onto the site as a whole before they get to the accreditation point where the vehicles need to stop provide their tickets, provide their car park passes, get the wristband and so forth. So there is, in all licensing applications, I hesitate to ever say there is no possibility. No self-respecting solicitor would ever be that definite about anything, but there is very limited risk of tailbacks and the sort of thing about which you would perhaps be concerned from a safety objective. However, we will be engaging with highways to slow that road from, I think, currently a 60 to a 30 mile an hour speed limit. We will be seeking to introduce some prohibitions on right-hand turns across effectively the other carriageway, and that will undoubtedly cause for people who are not at the event but who are using those roads some inconvenience. There will be additional sets of traffic lights, as an example. So you will take a little longer on a journey if you're using that route, particularly perhaps on the Thursday and perhaps on the Monday, probably before lunchtime. There will be some inconvenience. It's not our view, and it has not seemingly been the view of either the police or highways, that that would fairly be called a public nuisance. But in the spirit of transparency, it's proper that we do tell you that it is not as though the effect of having significant numbers of vehicles, whether they are camper vans, whether they are public transport coaches, whether they are private cars, and I actually presume some motorbikes, cyclists and so forth, it is not as though there will not be any impact at all. We then go on to page 99, Appendix 5, Representation 4. Some concern about the encouragement of drunk driving. I don't know if that's a particular point of concern for the committee, but just to attend to that. This is a camping event where about 20% of our tickets sold are in the nature of a family ticket, a ticket of 4 or a ticket of 5 and so forth. People tend to arrive in the first, certainly 24, let's say 36 hours of the event, and then stay. People do not, we do day tickets. They are predominantly, if not exclusively, for residents who live in the local vicinity. We do not have any experience elsewhere, either at, our event in Huntingdonshire or the number of the other events that we have put on and been engaged in for a number of years. We don't have a problem, candidly, with drunk drivers leaving late at night. I do note, and I'm bound to make the point, that in that representation, the last, if you will, complaint about the application and the event is the lack of availability of free tickets to a wider demographic than the geography proposed. I don't know if that is a backhanded compliment to the event, but it certainly felt like that when I read it. When an objector is saying, I'm disappointed I may not be able to get myself a free ticket for the event, it did feel something of a positive. Then we have the area of outstanding natural beauty representation. I'll just take a moment with that, and obviously you'll be hearing from the officer in due course. You and we are under a duty to have regard to the area of outstanding natural beauty. That is a responsibility that we welcome and that we entirely accept. There is no challenge to our having regard to it. It shouldn't come as any surprise, but one of the significant attractions of coming to St Giles is its beauty. It is magnificent. That is, if you will, part of the logic for us appearing in front of you in the first place. The landowner, which the representation generously recognises in the penultimate line on page 101, says the landowner understands the implications for light pollution, and that is generously a point made, and that's entirely right, and that's also entirely reflected in the letter that we have from the estate in the second supplementary bundle, where they make some generous comments about us as applicants, but also recognise their responsibilities. But our ecology report, details of which I'll come to, which I've already touched on briefly, not only recognises the area of outstanding natural beauty responsibilities, but extends those into a more general ecological, sustainable waste management sense. And so I do say to you unashamedly that as you would want, if not demand, a responsible and mature applicant in front of you for an event of such significance, the reports and the materials that you have in front of you, I hope, amply demonstrate that that is exactly the case here. The written submissions that I have made touch on a number of matters within your licensing policy, one of which I'll just attend to here. I don't need to take you back to the written submissions just yet, but the point that your policy makes, which is a point of, I say, some significance, that the Council may from time to time, paragraph 3.2, Council may from time to time receive reports on other policies, strategies and initiatives that may impact on licensing activity within the remit of the committee, subject to the general principle set out in this policy and the overriding need to promote the full licensing objectives. It may have regard to them when making licensing decisions. We invite you to have regard to the area of outstanding natural beauty. But what it also goes on to say at 3.3 is the committee may, this is a summary of the text, the committee may, after receiving such reports, include recommendations to amend the licensing policy itself. Your policy has not chosen to identify the area of outstanding natural beauty as being an area where entertainment of this sort is prohibited. It was perfectly within your remit to consider that. Indeed, I'm not familiar with the consultation that you fairly recently undertook on your new licensing policy. You may have had entreaties to do just that, but you chose not to. And so when I am making the submission to you that there is no, as I've called it, veto on entertainment of this sort in this area, that is a point, if I may say so, that your policy makes, rather than a point that you just need to take from me. The end of the third paragraph of this representation says the Council should be able to show a trail how it has assessed impacts and taken them into account in each decision it makes in relation to land within this AONB. And effectively, that's exactly what I say today is concluding. Exactly. There has been pre-application consultation with all of the responsible authorities, a number, if not most of whom are your own officers. There has been dialogue and discussion with the Safety Advisory Group, which is essentially a broader group of officers. There has been dialogue and discussion with those who have made representations. There have been reports produced to you included within today's papers. There is then a hearing and later a deliberation and a determination. Assessing the impacts is what we are doing. And so I entirely accept that that is effectively a burden that is imposed upon you by the Crow Act, as I'm now referring to it. But I would resist any suggestion, if later it is made, that in some way that prohibits you or restricts you or candidly ties one arm behind your back when considering whether to grant the application that's in front of you. And you'll have seen that there is reference in this representation to issues of tranquility, aesthetics, and natural beauty. Whilst we're entirely respectful of the points that are made, I'm afraid tranquility and public nuisance are not the same thing. And public nuisance is, on any view, the point with which we are predominantly concerned today. We have no appetite nor intention to do anything other than minimize our impact. We will do our level best to ensure as much tranquility is maintained as possible. But it is not, from, if I may say, your perspective, a question of tranquility. It's a question of public nuisance. Page 105, Appendix 6. is the letter that Mr. Barnett sent out. One thing I haven't really talked about very much as yet is the applicant, because that is neatly set out in the letter as to who they are and the type and style of event that is proposed. You will note that the curation musically of the event is by the very well-known and very well-regarded Radio 6 disc jockey Giles Peterson. And if you have ever listened to his show, you will know that it is a jazz and world music focused event. That's not to say that every artist performing here will be a jazz artist or a world music artist, but that is the predominant focus. That is the style and type of activities and events that you will have here. That doesn't mean it's without risk, but there are certainly musical genres that would perhaps cause you to raise your eyebrows a little more quickly than jazz and world music. And I say that that's a perfectly legitimate consideration for you when you come to retire. We then have the page 111, Appendix 7. We have the representations from the supporters. Mr. Lithgow, I'll not steal his thunder nor ruin his opportunity to address you in due course, but obviously we are very grateful to you for, grateful to him for his attendance. But he does make one point on which I have a little personal knowledge that I would just observe, that the Lammetry Festival, with which you may be familiar, which historically had been I think 5-day event. I think it used to start on a Wednesday, often with a Jules Holland concert on the Wednesday night. That is, I won't say no longer with us, but I think that is undertaken on a more sporadic basis, certainly not an annual basis anymore, as was previously the case. And although this application is entirely independent of that, when you come to reflect on the cultural strategy of the authority and the points about culture and development and the benefits and encouragement of music, that may be a feature of your deliberations. I've already mentioned that the Parish Council have seen fit to support. It shouldn't come as any surprise that I'm repeating myself in regard to that point, but the point I do make about the Parish Council now, and it's a point that I have been the recipient of from the other side of the fence, is that when a Parish Council makes a representation, it's fair to draw the inference that it is more than a single resident who has written the representation. A Parish Council may comprise 50 parishioners, maybe 100 or more parishioners, sometimes a greater number than that. But where a Parish Council endorses an application, it wouldn't be reasonable to think of it just as a single resident. It's not a numbers game, and I entirely understand it's not a numbers game, but that the Parish Council has seen fit is a point of reflection, I would suggest, for you in due course. Into Appendix 9, then, please. Appendix 9 starts with a little brochure, if I can call it that, a little presenter. It sets out some photographs to give you a flavour of the sort of thing that you might hope to see. And it has some press and some customer feedback and that sort of thing. I don't for a moment pretend that it goes really to the substance of will the licensing objectives be promoted or undermined by this event, but hopefully it gives a little flavour and colour. Of more significance, page 10 of that supplementary bundle, is the sound management plan. Noise is touched on, I think it's fair to say, by all of the representors, and it's important that we are managing our affairs in terms of sound or noise properly. So the first point to make is that Gareth Hance, who is the author of the report, who sits behind me and will be happy to answer any questions you may have in due course, is a very experienced sound consultant. And on page 14 of that appendix, there's a little detail about some of the artists and events that he has worked with across, I think, a 20 or more year career managing these sort of events. So the report breaks down quite simply as this: an assessment of the location, an assessment of the likely receptors, that's to say where noise will be received, what the primary sources of noise generation will be and what the secondary sources will be, how that will be monitored, and to break down, I think, about 3 sides of A4 into a single sentence, it will be broken down in 2 ways. There will be static monitoring points around the site, and there will be mobile monitoring undertaken by Gareth and his team, who will be in communication with the site. They will be effectively patrolling the perimeter, and or they will be patrolling and visiting any areas where the community have engaged, indicating they're concerned about noise, and that's set out on page 21. There will be a helpline, there will be a phone line, and we will be responding if indeed any concerns are articulated. There's controls, there's detail about the sound systems on page 23. The point about sound systems that we would make to you is that for the significant stages, we will be using effectively state-of-the-art facilities that are not, as was the case perhaps 20 years ago, a bank of speakers all facing in one direction that would have the risk of effectively bleeding off-site and disturbing those who were, if you forgive the phrase, in the line of fire. It's a very sophisticated system setup that is multi-directional, focuses itself toward the audience, because there is nothing in it for us to focus it at anyone other than the audience, so as to get that right balance between audience satisfaction with the entertainment and the volumes on site, and to ensure that the volumes are satisfactory for those off site. Effectively, loud as you like on site, quiet as you like off. And the system setup is an important part of that was not within the armoury of acousticians 10 or 15 years ago. There's some other points made. I'm bound to say that pages 27 through to 31 are a little over my head, and Gareth will attend to those if you have questions about those, but it is quite technical. He did say to me when we were having a coffee beforehand that he makes no apology for it being technical. It's a science, and you need to get it right. So if you do have questions about that, I suspect he's the best person to direct them, those questions toward. Page 35, our alcohol management plan. I'm not planning on taking you through that, save pages 38 and 39. Training. Challenge 25, detail about how to be observant and make refusals as and or where appropriate. It's something that your policy touches on. You'd expect it of a pub. You'd expect it of a bar. No reason you wouldn't expect it of us. Then page 42, the ecological protection policy. I will leave you to reflect on this document. It is important, particularly in the context of the live objection, but the lighting parts are set out on page 44 of your supplementary. It talks about dark sky status, talks about working with Cranbourne Chase. It talks about practical measures that are going to be undertaken, down lighting, moderating lighting, only where appropriate, and so forth. I think it's right, as mentioned to me earlier, that there is some geological benefit to the site plan that accompanies the application over which licensable activities will take place. Effectively, it falls behind a tree line, which will, offer some help, and I think that wasn't the case with the previous event held in the vicinity. But page 46, sensible practical measures about candidly turning lights off, making sure that they are suitably dimmed, and so forth. The rest of the report does touch on other important sustainable and ecological matters: site contamination, waste management, grey waste, protection of biodiversity, protection of trees, restoration of the site, which is very much a part of the discussions that we have had with the landowner. Page 52, there's a document titled Objections Matrix. Just to explain what this is, we have tried to identify what the primary concerns that have been articulated to you are, and then we have sought to identify where you will find conditions or you will find elements of the Event Safety Management Plan specifically attending to those points of concern. It was produced before the conditions that have been drawn up with the Dorset Constabulary. So there are additional conditions that will touch on some of the matters there, but it hopefully is a way in which you can quickly see that every single point that is raised against us is thought about, planned, programmed, and being addressed. Page 54, there's a letter from Shaftesbury Estates. I'll leave you to look at that in your own time. And then there's second supplementary information. There is, I think, a note, I think drawn up by Mr. Lithgow. I'll leave him to touch on that. He makes, I thought, the very interesting point that there are only about 4 hours of proper, what we would call proper darkness in the nights in question. And so the degree to which the pure dark would be adversely impacted is, on any view, modest and limited. There are some submissions from me which I have tried my best not to simply repeat for the last 40 or so minutes. You will see, and I hope for the benefit of your legal officer as much as anything else, that there is a little summary of the paragraphs that I would invite your attention toward as regards your policy. The overarching point that I make about your policy is that, aside from each application being on its individual merits and us predominantly being concerned with the promotion of the licensing objectives, there is cultural benefit that the authority recognise and are keen to develop and see developed in regard to music and other activities that you would fairly associate with this application. And so, putting it bluntly, music and dancing, fun and laughter, perhaps with a drink, is essentially not something that we should be looking down our nose at in any way. Some detail about the individuals that appear in front of you, both Claire and Joe, Mr. Barnett, who have very significant experience operating across the country on a number of music events of a similar description, and in Mr. Barnett's case, internationally as well. The traffic management summary at page 8 of that supplementary I've already touched on. It is only a summary. I entirely accept that, but I hope helpful to see it. And then there are a schedule of conditions that have been drawn up in dialogue with the Dorset Police. You will have had the opportunity to look at those. I'll just touch on the overarching observation about the conditions themselves. The police felt, and their representation says as much, that although they were respectful of the operating schedule that the applicants had first put in on the application, and they were engaged in the dialogue with the Safety Advisory Group in November, so knew what was coming, they felt that there were particular matters that could and should be on the face of a premises license so that there was no ambiguity whatsoever about what you do and don't have to deliver to. And we entirely got that point. I don't in any way belittle the conditions, but actually very little, there's a point about hours that you'll have seen on Fridays and Saturdays, but actually very little changes insofar as most of these matters were going to be attended to within the Event Safety Management Plan. But they felt they wanted to see them in black and white on the licence, and candidly, and being fairly unusually transparent, if we're going to be doing them anyway, well, why wouldn't we agree to let them appear on the face of the licence? So if you take as a tiny example that there will be no off sales, well, there were never going to be any off sales. And so it was perfectly legitimate to put that on as a condition, that there would be no glass on site and that we would only be using sustainable or suitable materials for cups and so forth. Well, we were always going to do that anyway. They wanted to see that as a condition on site, and we're perfectly happy with that. There's some other matters: training, welfare, first aid, CCTV, incident and refusal logs, and so forth. All of which, as I say, will be touched on in our policies, but that they are conditions is perfectly understood. That's it. Thank you very much for giving me the courtesy of the not insignificant time to address you, but it's a significant application. Let's not beat about the bush. It is obviously very significant for my clients, but it's not without significance, I would say, for residents. And that's why it is important that we have, well, I'm calling it a bundle, such a bundle of evidence in front of you. But it's also, I say, and your policy recognises, important for the authority, because it is a cultural event of some significance, and whilst it needs to be managed properly, candidly, I would commend it to you and invite you to conclude it's a legitimate application to grant.
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. That's a very detailed introduction to the application. Incidentally, the three of us have visited the location to have a look. Have you visited it?
Although I shouldn't admit that, but no is the right answer.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. That was very well documented, and it was easy to follow during our or through our presentations. So thank you very much for that. Traffic management plan I was going to mention, but then the supplementary came through, and I saw that. That's superbly documented, and it was part of the initial conditions you were talking with the SAG about. My one concern about it, having visited the site with my colleagues the other day, had we followed the postcode, we ended up all in Wimborne St Giles, right next to the church and the farm gate. So I expect a few of you done that. Luckily, our colleague over there said use what's 3 words. Now, I didn't have a clue, so I had to load the app on my phone. Eventually, we found it. Yeah, I still ended up at the church. In your advisory, when you're planning this event, please make it plain on the traffic, because we don't want the volume of cars going through some of them are unclassified roads, so it would be an absolute disaster going through Wimborne St Giles. So please take that in mind.
Thank you. Just to say that I sent through the summary of the traffic management plan, because having sent you best part of 100 pages, I wasn't entirely sure anybody would thank me if I sent you the 45-page traffic management plan that I've also got. There's a tipping point with the solicitors have to understand that the production of everything conceivable isn't always to everybody's advantage. And part of that traffic management plan will effectively be a sub-plan, which is about signage and marshalling. And so, as you would reasonably expect, although I'm sure we'll take the point about the postcode needing to be suitable and appropriate, there will be marshals, appropriate signage and so forth, some way away from the event. Not too intrusive, but we would be, I think it's fair to say, very disappointed if anyone were not directed in the right way, because there are, as you will have seen from the site plan, a number of gates, particular gates for particular points of access and so forth. So it's a good point, well made, but it is being thought about.
Just whilst you're on that, Don, I'll let you leave, but on the traffic management plan, it's a good detailed plan. 1, will it work? And 2, are you looking at a one-way system at all there? I'm conscious that two-way traffic can build up, particularly if you've got no right turn. And where are they going to turn around? Do you have a plan on that?
We do have a plan, but I probably don't have the answer for you without going into the plan. But what I can say is that we've been working with highways in order to draw up a proposal that they would be happy with. The no right turn wouldn't prohibit anyone from accessing the road or lane or indeed the unclassified road on the right-hand side. It's just that they will have to drive a bit further along before they get to a roundabout or a turning point. So that would, might be a mile, might be a couple of miles further on from the site, so that there's no build-up by the sites and by the gates.
There's not many turning points on those roads there, and they're quite narrow, so you might need to build that in where a turning point is or where you're going to have a controlled turning. Otherwise, you'll have chaos further out from the site.
Right, I think it's back to me. There was one little point in there. Can we set a date for a debrief? Because I know we say we'll have a debrief, but there's no confirmation of when a debrief has got to be instigated by.
Sorry. Could I suggest this? Could we have, yes is the one-word answer, but could I suggest that if we are to have one and if it is to be a condition, that it is a condition that says shall be no later than. If COVID has taught us anything, setting a specific date doesn't always work, and somebody could be ill or it could be inconvenient and so on. No later than, absolutely, there's no issue with that at all. But I would invite you to the conclusion that, I don't know whether it's 8 weeks or 12 weeks beyond the event, it must have happened, but then that the various officers and the applicants and the advisors that they use and the consultants, they come up with a date between them nearer the time.
Yes, thank you. And that's all dependent on whether the licence is granted or not, of course. Just need to clarify how many days the festival is running for, because in the paperwork it kind of like specifies 4 days, like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and it ends up being 6 because it's opening on Wednesday. And future festivals, if they are to be at Wimborne St Giles, how long will they be? So I'd just like to clarify that.
Yes. So this year there is no proposal to operate on the Wednesday at all. And the event will not happen it will happen on the Thursday. Thursday will be day one, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. No activities beyond Sunday night. Monday is leaving day. There's no entertainment at lunchtime or anything like that on a Monday. Monday is leave. But I think technically we tip beyond midnight on Sunday night, so you make the fair point that it's a fifth day. The Wednesday application date effectively boils down to this. We need, if you're minded to grant a licence, we need to prove ourselves as being a reputable organiser and operator of an event. Our view was that the Wednesday wasn't appropriate this year. I think there is established precedent for another operator who actually never brought their event to this site, but I think they had a Wednesday permission. We looked at it and thought, well, maybe there's something there, and the Llama Tree, I think, used to start fairly early in the week. So it was, whether it's an abundance of caution, whether it's a little bit of ambition for the future, this year certainly there will be no Wednesday. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. My last one is just a bit of an observation, really, having visited the site the other night and having terrible trouble locating one another because the phone signal is not 4G and there's hardly any 3G. So I just want to make you aware of that, because that might be difficult, and I don't know if you can enhance the signal somehow. I don't technology these days, but just make you aware of that. That's it from me.
Thank you, John. You label this as a family event, but
if I said family event, family friendly is the phrase that I should have used. There will be lots of children, predominantly under the age of 15, who will come with parents, some in prams, some in a form of pushchair. Yes, certainly. We're certainly not an over 18s rave type event.
But that brings me on to my concern. It's a family-friendly event, and yet you're still playing music and selling alcohol to the small hours. do the two actually work together, family friendly, and selling loud music till late at night and selling alcohol? How can you keep the families safe?
Yes. Well, the first observation, sir, to make is that there are, I would say, more than dozens of events that would fairly be categorised as being family friendly that operate till these hours all around the country. There is nothing exclusive about late hours that precludes children from attending. We generally would be thinking carefully about the positioning, for example, of our children or family camping areas. So they would generally be directed away, perhaps from noise sources, or in a more protected space. We will also have people who will want to bluntly stay up late. And whether that is mum because dad is back at the tent with the kids, whether that's dad because mum's back at the tent with the kids, or frankly, whether that's because mum and dad have gone away without the kids, there will certainly be volumes of people late at night wanting to enjoy activities. I should say, not the volumes of people who will be enjoying the entertainment at, let's say, 11. At 11, you'll have more people up and about, less people in the campsites than you'll have at 1 in the morning, and less again at 2, and less again at 3. But some people will be out, and slowly through the course of the night, effectively the site gets smaller from an environmental concern footprint. But if we don't manage the noise, people don't sleep. If people don't sleep, they don't come again. So it's not in our interest. And they're only generally under a marquee, save for those who are in camper vans or caravans. So we have to manage it.
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. Your capacity this year, you're applying for 17,999, rising to 24,999. You have several entrances there, exit egress points. You'll know how many online tickets you've sold, but you won't necessarily know how many roadies, helpers, staff. How are you going to manage that? Because if you have 18,001, then you've breached your licence conditions. So how will you manage that?
Because tickets will be limited to 15,000. So 2,999 will be staff, crew, artists, and so forth. And we know that we can manage that. That's, if you forgive the phrase, that's the right proportion between customer attendance and those working on site in one form or another.
Thank you. You've got a helpline you're talking about there. How will you support the community out there? Because people might be out off the site, misbehaving is possible, does happen. Will you put a roving anything out in the community?
The helpline is, well, first of all, the publication of the helpline, if I just explain that. We've had 2 resident meetings so far. We have a 3rd meeting for the 12th of April. We then have further ongoing dialogue, and then in the beginning of July, a fairly significant letter drop that extends beyond the letter drops that we've done thus far, which I think is 5 kilometres, but yeah, 5 kilometres, will go out, and that will publicise our phone number. And our helpline is not just, I'm worried it's noisy or I'm concerned. It's everything. It's everything that you might be concerned with. I've seen someone on the road, I saw a badly parked car, whatever that might be. We will have a security and stewarding detachment. We'll have response teams. We will have a very comprehensive team able to, well, particularly from most obviously the noise perspective, doing external patrols, monitoring and so forth. If I may say so, it's pretty sophisticated for us to be able to respond to any concern that's brought to our attention.
Thank you. So these leaflets will be going out to the local community shortly.
The engagement with the local community and leaflets and so forth and dialogue, that's been ongoing, but the significant letter drop, which will cover a significant radius, which is intended to cover all those that could reasonably expect to possibly be impacted by the event. That will go out in July with the number on it. And the reason it goes out late is so that people have the number to hand when the event itself goes ahead. But the engagement with the community in the broader sense is ongoing and has been, forgive me, I think the first meeting was on the 21st of February. I forget the second date.
No, November last year was the first.
Forgive me. November was the first, 21st of February was the second, and then 12th of April is the third. So we are engaged in a pretty comprehensive dialogue already.
You will publicise the phone number or contact details for the event. That goes into your control room. And would that be staffed 24/7? Moving on, I see that you're promoting no sales of single-use plastics on site as part of your event. Let's hope it's a nice summer. Let's hope you have a dry one. How will you supply water? How will people there who turn up with nothing in their hands effectively, with water, if they want potable water for a drink or whatever?
Well, two answers. One's the slightly formal answer, which is obviously all premises licence oblige all premises licence holders to provide free potable water to everyone at all times. The more practical, less legal answer is effectively we will have taps throughout the site available to all, both in the campsites and all the surrounding areas. For all the campers, what tends to happen is people tend to bring and fill up, whether it's bottles or large camping containers, but there will be taps available throughout, and anybody who wants a glass of water at the bar will be able to be provided with water, as you would again expect of a pub, a bar, a hotel, restaurant, etc.
Thank you. I noticed in your training, and I can't find it in front of me at the moment, but you mentioned about the protection of females and girls in there. And that to me seems a disappointing but sad change in society at these sort of events. How are you actually going to protect the girls and the females at your event to keep them safe, to prevent such matters taking place?
So, well, two things really, well, three things. The first is that it has become much more commonplace for licence conditions to reflect that change in society that you've touched on. So there is, as an example, Ask Angela, which, forgive me, your colleague obviously is familiar with it. It's a relatively simple but entirely practical protocol, often a condition on a new pub licence these days, where if you're in any form of distress or you're being harassed or you're uncomfortable or whatever it might be, you go to the bar and ask for Angela, and it's a code for what it means. The police, when we were engaging with them effectively last week, wanted us to reflect that on the face of the licence this. Staff will be trained. We'll have security patrolling throughout. Staff, not all of them will be experienced in events of this sort, but people will be eyes on that sort of thing. Can we give a guarantee? Probably not. Can we do our best? Yes.
Security, will there be plainclothes security patrols on site?
Currently, all security are uniformed and identifiable, so high-vis jackets. And if I can expand on the point that you raised about the violence against women and girls, we do have all our frontline security and staff who engaged in two forms of training last year. One led by Cambridgeshire Police, which was harassment management, and the second one being disclosure management, which was for our incident response staff. So we have quite a highly trained level of staffing on site in that area.
So do you mind if I just make a small point about plainclothes security? And I don't necessarily say it in regard to this event, but I know that it's been an issue that I've been asked about in the past. The general view, certainly of the police, I don't say of licensing committees, is that that's potentially trouble. Because if people come up and say, you can't do that, you can do this, I'm security, I'm not, the identification lends an authority to the person interacting with the member of public. If they don't have anything that immediately identifies them, it can lead to conflict. It's not necessarily an answer to your question, but to make the point.
That's fine. Thank you very much. I take all that. I'm just looking, Emma, over to you for the moment.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for a comprehensive report as well. Obviously, you've liaised with the police and you've been liaising with environmental protection. Should this licence be granted, you are happy and content to have the conditions that environmental protection and the police have discussed with you that would be attached to any licence?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry. Yes, absolutely. And forgive me if I didn't make that clear earlier. The discussions with both officers was extensive. I have to say environmental discussion wasn't actually with me directly, but the police discussion was with me directly, and it was on the express understanding that those conditions, if you're minded to grant a licence, could and should attach to the licence, that our discussions concluded on.
And can I just confirm on one, which is obviously on the sale of alcohol, obviously going forward, the actual wording of it is alcohol on Friday and Saturdays to be 0400 hours, 0500 hours for 2024 and beyond, with the prior written permission of Dorset Police. I would also like to say that we'd had the local authority in that as well.
Yeah. And then, of course, is the only correct answer to give you on that. I'm embarrassed to say that was probably head down trying to get the agreement written up that failed to include that. I think most of the other conditions say with the licensing authority's approval and Dorset Police, it's a miss, and I apologise for it. It's nothing. There's nothing sinister about it. It's a typo.
It's okay. Just like to keep everything transparent and as it is. And just with regards to the timings, obviously the only adjustment on timings was the sale of alcohol. All the other timings were to remain the same. Yes.
We specifically discussed that with the police, who were I'll misquote the officer, but he said, you know, we're engaged on a crime and disorder basis. Alcohol is the predominant concern about crime and disorder, not the entertainment or the late night refreshment. So.
And with regards to the event itself, obviously we've touched on the fact that obviously if it's going to be granted, it will be 4 days, but potentially going forward, it could be over 6 days. Is it going to be the same time of year every year, or is there going to, would it be, you know, you're planning on having one in sort of, you know, winter or?
Thank you. The contract with the estate is to run over the third weekend in August over the following 2 years, subject to this event going successfully this year. And just to clarify on the number of days, because I understand how we term these is a little bit subjective based on the event this year is 4 days. If we're not accepting that Monday is a licensed day or within that parameter.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
And the licence here, if granted, would allow for a 5-day show, not a 6-day show. So we wouldn't ever deem the Monday, or we're not applying for any licensable activities aside from those that cover the end of the Sunday night, if that makes sense.
And just obviously touched on one point, which I think is, you know, really important. You've touched on the letter drops, you know, going forward, whether, you know, the licence granted or not, or even if you applied for a temporary events notice to have an event there, I would say that liaising with residents is absolutely paramount, because obviously there was one comment in the report where somebody said, you know, they live local and didn't realise that anything was going on because of the signs that were put up. It was sort of, it was said by somebody else. So, you know, if you can let a drop in, obviously liaise with parish councils, you know, I think that's a really important thing to do going forward.
May I just say this, and it is touched on in the papers, we'll not go back through the papers. The commitment to engage with the community is absolute. There is no, we may have missed someone. I'm not challenging that. If we miss someone, then we apologise. But the fact we had a residents' meeting in November, I hope, before I even bore you with all the other stuff, I hope that that is as good a sort of window into the soul of our commitment to engage as you might find.
Yeah, especially with an event on the size that this event is. Obviously, we've done quite a few of these. We've had a lot of people. We've had representations of about 99 residents, but it is good that you liaise, and I do encourage you to liaise going forward. Thank you. I don't have any further questions at the moment.
Thank you very much. I think Joe's got off lightly so far. So, sound. We've spoken about sound so far. Explain to us how you can keep it in the ground without, because that's going to trouble the neighbours. If there's one thing that's going to trouble them, it's the sound travelling, and particularly the bass.
I say this, although I'm very happy for you to give him a grilling. We'd all enjoy it on this side of the desk. The best person to actually answer this is our acoustician and sound consultant, Gareth. So do you mind if we just defer to him, because he will know better than anyone else?
Yeah, so I think it's on. Yeah, I think the LED's broken on. Yeah, I think it's on there, and I think...
do you need any help with sound technology?
Yeah. For full disclosure, I was a touring live sound engineer for about 20 years. I should know this. Okay, so control of noise at source is the predominant mechanism. What that means is that we are going to start with system design, look at the emissions. So the best thing we can do is make sure that we're going into this with the best possible systems that we possibly can. And we've extensively done this. There's been a lot of modelling, computer modelling going on, such that we can predict where we expect, the noise breakout to be and control it accordingly. So once we've gone into the situation with minimising the emissions in the first instance, the next thing we would then do is operational controls. And what that means is that we have competent people in control of those systems at all times. They're not left to run themselves. We don't leave it to the DJ. We have competent engineers in control, and we have communication protocol in place so that we can talk to those engineers about making those adjustments as we go. I guess the third sort of level in this is monitoring, because obviously no amount of monitoring isn't going to make it any quieter, but it does give us an opportunity to assess what that impact is. So we are monitoring the sound levels at source, so we've got an idea of what stages, what sound sources are running and how loud they are, and the spectral components. You mentioned low frequency bass, so we're looking at the character of the sound as well as just the overall level. And we will have set during the sound checks and the opening acts a good level for each of those sources to operate, and a tonality for them as well, that if we have to reduce the bass, we will do that before we've got into before we've got into Friday and Saturday. Hopefully we should have dialed in those levels. To ensure that the breakout isn't occurring beyond the perimeter of the site, and then we have a roaming team, as well as these fixed monitoring locations which have been put in the license or the application. The idea is that we have, using the remote telemetry on these fixed locations, we have advanced warning if we're getting breakout in a given direction. We also have the roaming teams. We're also looking at the weather patterns, and we're also looking at the complaints line as well. So if we do get a cluster of complaints coming from a location, we know that perhaps we've got a breakout going in a given direction. So it's a multi-stage control mechanism, starting with the design of the systems, getting them configured and set up correctly on site, and then monitoring when we're operational. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Have you done any sound checks so far today?
No, we haven't got any systems on site, but what we have got is a computer model of the site. It's a three-dimensional topographical model with all the ground absorption, volume absorption, reverberance off the buildings. It's a fairly detailed model. It's the same process that is used by things like HS2 and Crossrail. It's a robust mechanism.
Thank you very much.
My car parking ticket runs out in about 3 minutes. So is it possible for me to break out and renew it, or will that disrupt?
If you would like to renew your ticket, that's fine. We will wait till you come.
Okay, well, it's only it's just up, the car park is very near.
We will keep going, but we won't ignore your request to speak. Lighting. I notice that the festoons will have LED lightings, LED bulbs. Will there be LEDs across the site elsewhere? Because I'm aware that they're more controllable, more energy efficient, and so on and so on.
Thank you. After a good and lengthy discussion with Cranbourne Chase yesterday, we have actually been looking at options for capping our festoon lighting. So we do have a significant amount of lighting across the site, as you would imagine, with an expansive event. So we are looking at the option to cap that festoon, which will direct the light downwards instead of losing the light upwards. And then we have also now found some filters for our tower lights, which reduce them from 5,000 to 3,000 Kelvin, which I believe is acceptable for Cranbourne Chase and for the dark skies. So that will also assist. And they've also been so helpful as to share some workings with us on how to angle our directional floodlights, so for signage, for back of house lighting, etc. So there's a number of things that we're doing in terms of that operational lighting that should assist with the dark skies.
So forgive me, it's not necessarily answering your point, but just to say that it's fair that we recognise a tension, if I can call it that, between doing our level best to ensure that the dark skies are promoted whilst ensuring that this site is safe, going back to our vulnerable female point from 10 minutes ago. We can't have a site that isn't safe, so there is going to be light, no point pretending otherwise.
Thank you. I think that's very impressed and very pleased to hear the answer, but as you know, downlighting works better rather than lighting the sky up. So what you've achieving covers both. It protects the environment, protects the dark sky, and protects the people down below it. Thank you. So you're doing pre-pitch tents. How does that work? Do they pre-book the tent when they come in? They leave the tent behind? You plot where they're going to go and so on?
So yes, exactly that. Effectively, there is a subcontracted company who actually operate in large numbers of festivals all around the country, and they have an area, a campsite area, in which they pitch tents prior to your arrival. Those tents range between a very grand teepee that might accommodate 6, down to relatively modest tents that you might have thought to have acquired in millets 20 years ago for 2 or 4. And you effectively have the luxury, and I think, having not been always the greatest fan of camping, I'll call it the luxury of not either bringing your tent, taking your tent away, nor pitching it at all. And obviously for that you pay a fee. And generally those tented areas are monitored and patrolled by the staff who are engaged in ensuring, for example, that mattresses are pumped up or that tent pegs are in place and so on and so forth. So yes. It ranges, it's fair to say, from the very grand to the more modest, but the principle's the same for everyone. Somebody else puts your tent up for you.
Sounds good to me. Brilliant, thank you. Right. Catherine, Aileen, do you have any questions for the applicant that haven't been covered so far?
No, I don't have any further questions.
Darren, do you have any questions?
No, I haven't got any questions. Thank you.
You're going to have lots, so we can get Mr. Lithgow back in again and give him time to get his car park and take.
Yeah.
Mr. Burden, would you like to? Do you have any questions for the applicant?
It may be simpler if I just make the points during my presentation.
Darren, have you got anything else you want to add at the moment? I'm just trying to.
So I don't want to cause any delay, but maybe we just have a 2-minute comfort break anyway, because we've been going a little while.
That would be great.
Thank you.
Maybe we've met someone. I think we probably have. I've been to Festival with he was oh, right. Really? Moved to Northern Ireland back home. Oh, right. Yeah, 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah. Maybe Vanessa's in my team, so I speak to her occasionally. Otherwise. I don't know, I've only worked at Benton BCP before. Yeah. I'm used to it. Yeah, I give it above when they put it. That's what I used to do. No.
Thank you, Mr. Lisk. Are you legal again?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Not expecting to be that
Well,
long.
I've lined up the evening to be here as long as it takes, so we could be... Mr. Lithgow, do you have any questions for the applicant at this time?
Not at the moment, no, I don't. No. Thanks very much. I'll speak later on when you ask me to.
Mr. Burden, anything else you want? Anything at this time? Any questions? No questions. Okay. Mr. Lithgow, would you like to make your statement or comments, whatever you would like to say, please?
It's great. Right, it is. Yeah. Okay. Well, I hope everyone can hear me. Well, I'm delighted that the police have now decided to withdraw their objection to this licence application. So that really just leaves me to address 2 points, really. Firstly, the threat posed to the Cranbourne Chase dark skies area by festival lighting. Now, I've got a huge amount of sympathy and support with the work that people like Richard are doing and their Dark Skies initiative. But I think it's worth stressing that there are only 4 hours of proper darkness on each night that the festival will be operating. Astronomical twilight begins as early as 3:30 in the morning and lasts until about 11 o'clock in the evening. Therefore, I believe that any light pollution will have a limited and fleeting impact on the surrounding area. Secondly, the levels of amplified sound emanating from the festival site. Speaking as someone who lives within walking distance, really, just across open fields from the site, I acknowledge that the sound will be probably audible in my property, but I'm confident that it will be monitored and regulated by experienced and competent technicians, in marked contrast, I might add, to the sounds coming from the many unregulated house parties that are a feature of the summer holidays in the area. And then there, of course, are the motorists who roar along the main roads and country lanes near my house with their car stereos blasting out at top volume with the windows open between May and September. And of course, you have the visitors who call at local houses at all hours and announce their arrival to the entire neighbourhood by honking their car horns rather than undertaking the strenuous effort of getting out of their vehicles and ringing the appropriate doorbell. So the point I'm making is that none of these categories of noise polluters are subject to any controls whatsoever. So I think we should all be very grateful to a well-run organisation like We Out Here, which is prepared to go to considerable lengths to accommodate the interests of residents and visitors alike in order to put on a festival which will bring a lot of pleasure to thousands of people. I'm one of these people who cherishes the peace and quiet of the countryside, but that mustn't mean the peace of the graveyard. We need more festivals like this, and I think they enhance our area rather than diminish it. And therefore, I hope this application will be granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions? One for me. How far, what's the distance from your house to the festival site?
Hang on. About 3.5 miles across open fields. There's a walkway and you can walk there. It's within walking distance. You can get through there. And it's about 3.5 miles. There's a network of footpaths that will take you to the site. So I will obviously hear some sound, but I think it'll be a regulated sound and it's livable with, certainly, very much so. As I said, much more than the noise that I get from neighbouring properties at all times of the year, actually.
That's it, thank you. Is it the church side of the village that you live? Just because we all know where the church is.
Of Sixpenny Handley, which is if you walk Sixpenny Handley, just on the edge, it's right on the Wimborne St Giles edge, and you walk just along the fields through Monkton up Wimborne, and you reach it. It's quite an easy walk, really.
Catherine, your team, any questions from?
No, thank you.
Darren, Environment, have you got anything?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, do you wish to say anything at this time? Or we're soon going to start with summing up and coming back round, so you'll have your chance to say then. Yeah. Yeah. If you would like to say now what you would like to say, please.
Thank you. I think probably it would be better to say now rather than confused with any summing up. What has become clear is that the AONB wasn't involved, and it was only through a local councillor contacting the team that we were aware that this was happening. So the assertions that you've been getting of long consultation with local interests and stakeholders didn't include the AONB. And that may well be because events were previously held in undesignated countryside. And it's also become clear that the understanding of what is an AONB and its purposes may not be fully understood across every part of the council. And that's not surprising because in many respects, it is largely on the planning side that AONB matters are discussed. But there are countryside issues, there are cultural issues, and it might help if I just went over for a couple of minutes the purposes of AONB designation and the difference between an AONB and a national park. An AONB is designated as nationally important landscape, and it is purely for conserving and enhancing natural beauty. Government has made clear that natural beauty includes heritage, culture, and wildlife. Unlike national parks, which have an additional duty to provide for recreation, we are not required statutorily to do that. So we have quite a wide brief in the concept of an AONB, but a narrow one in actions in the sense of conserving and enhancing natural beauty. So that's our challenge to say, well, what are the key characteristics? What are the facets to take into account? And the Countryside and Rights of Way Act 2000, CROW as we friendly call it, sets out there that the local authority has a management plan for its AONB. In the case of Cranbourne Chase, where we have 4 county scale authorities plus 3 district scale, they've come together in a partnership and have employed a team to prepare that management plan, which is a statutory requirement. It has to go across the Secretary of State's desk, and it has to be adopted by those local authorities. So the AONB management plan is statutorily Dorset Council's policies for the AONB. That's section 89 for those that like those things to reference. And we have to set out in there key characteristics. And tranquility is one that the public brought up because the process of management plan formulation involves a process very similar to local plan formulation, where you produce a discussion document, you put it out for consultation, you go and talk to parishes and groups, you get feedback, you revise it, you put it out for consultation again, you then produce a final version. So it's a long-winded process. And the tranquility element, the seeing tranquility, what the character of the area is, and the hearing tranquility, water, bird song, things like that, all those factors have come about through that consultation. the element within the management plan that didn't come into play before previously mentioned events were licensed is the International Dark Sky Reserve. It was October 2019 that the AONB received the accolade of being the 14th International Dark Sky Reserve because of the quality of its dark skies. That's absolutely fantastic. We have a period in which to reduce light pollution if we are to retain that accolade. So it means there's an obligation on all the authorities to reduce year-on-year light pollution. Unfortunately, that hasn't been understood by everybody. And so we get statements in this paper that we were provided within the last 48 hours, which refers to minimising light pollution. I'm sorry, we have to avoid additional light pollution. Full stop. There are ways of doing it, and those of you that have read our good practice guidance on our website, which I referred to in my representation, will see that there are very simple ways of doing it. There are certain light sources and light types, and they are directed down. And LED lights do, to comply, need to be 3000 Kelvin or less, and preferably 2700 Kelvin, because it is the blue light that is damaging both to human health and wildlife. Only yesterday we had an online meeting with Claire and one of her colleagues, and it was good. We made a lot of progress. But I sense you may have gathered from earlier on this afternoon that discussions like that were going on from November. No, it was only late February that the AONB was aware that this was happening, and we've been running to catch up with Claire and her team and have some very productive discussions. However, the AONB is also very concerned, purely through the hard school of experience, that if things aren't in writing, then you don't actually have anything to come back on later. And so we're working on it, and we're happy to continue to work on it. But comments that there's only 4 hours of dark sky are not helpful. Because it's a limited period of dark sky, it is even more important that the lighting is dark sky compliant, so that yes, we do have safety on site, but we also do not have sky glow. You may recall that before lockdown, there was an event at Wimborne St Giles, and we were very concerned about the extent of festoon lights there. And my colleague, our Dark Skies advisor, ran an experiment with the people that were operating that. And from Knowlton Henge, Knowlton Church, sky glow. On the radio, please switch off the festoon lights. Switch off, sky glow goes. A pretty clear demonstration that 5 kilometres of festoon lights create sky glow which impede vision up into the sky. The current proposal is suggesting 8 kilometres of festoon lights. Now, we found for that previous event that it's possible to acquire hoods, cowls, call them what you will, that go over the top, and the light goes downwards. So you're not wasting light going up there, you're actually making it safer because you're putting more light down on the ground. So a lot of the things are quite straightforward. And the light pollution aspect can be covered. But as I say, the AONB's concern is through the hard school of experience, if a licence or permission, any regulatory process moves forward without the relevant conditions or without holding off until things have been finally agreed as being compliant, then the argument can be actually the council have not followed their duty in section 85, which is to have due regard. And I'm sure those of you that have looked closely at my representation, where I referred you to the guidance from DEFRA on how this should be carried out. And it basically says, as has already been stated this afternoon, in exercising or performing any functions in relation to or so as to affect land in these areas, the relevant authorities shall have regard to their purposes, i.e. conserving and enhancing natural beauty. And it then says, it is important to note that the duties apply to any decisions or activities an authority may take affecting land in these areas, not just those that relate to narrowly defined environmental or countryside issues. That is why I say this is an overarching piece of legislation which applies across the whole of the council's activities. And I'm not disagreeing with Matthew Phipps that where it says in paragraph 8, it is important to be aware that the duties do not override particular obligations or considerations, which have to be taken into account by relevant authorities in carrying out any function. However, they are intended to ensure that the purposes for which these areas, AONBs, have been designated are recognised as an essential consideration in reaching decisions or undertaking activities that impact on those areas. The proposals appear to me and my colleagues to be impacting on the area unless quite a lot of things are done. We've talked about the sky glow and the dark night skies, and the other thing that you will probably have noticed looking on our website about our dark night skies and our, I've got hard copy here, 10 top stargazing sites. Knowlton Henge and Church is one of those top stargazing sites. It is very popular with all the astronomical societies around the area. It's an English Heritage managed site, so it's readily accessible. And somewhat strangely, it wasn't selected as a monitoring site for sound, despite the fact that it's one of the closest publicly accessible points to the site of Wimborne St Giles and this proposed event. And it just so happens that there's a gathering of what my colleagues call Perseid meteors in the sky over this particular weekend. So that particular location is going to be crammed with astronomers who are not going to be happy if there's loads of light, and they may be able to put up with some music, but that's a personal thing for them. So there are quite a lot of things in relation to the dark night skies, which I suspect we can resolve, but being people of political awareness, you will appreciate that without the little pinprick of have we got our licence yet, there isn't the pressure on the operators to actually do it. And I'm not saying I'm ungrateful for the fact we had a meeting yesterday, because it was great. It would have been great to have had that 3 months ago, because we could have resolved everything now, I'm sure. But we do need to make sure things are fully confirmed in writing, and that we know all these issues about dark night skies and lighting are resolved. The tranquility issue is more subjective, and we recognise that. It is nevertheless something that the character of the area, where we have, unlike the Dorset coast, not hordes of visitors. We have visitors that come because there aren't so many people. It's a bit of a conundrum, really. You have people coming because there are less people. They don't want the coast. They want to walk. They want to cycle. And lo and behold, there's loads of traffic. So we have sympathy with those that are saying hang on, there's going to be a lot of traffic, it could be quite problematic. We're aware that the visual aesthetics of the countryside are going to be changed for a period with loads of extra signs as well. So you're going to get signs all over the place, come this way, the yellow and black, the AA signs, not the most sympathetic in the countryside. So there are other aspects of that that we're apprehensive about. We're equally apprehensive about this whole issue, and it echoes the questions you were asking about when are things operating, because Appendix 2 of the supplementary information seems to indicate quite clearly that there would be music on Wednesday from 2 o'clock through to 11 o'clock. There would be alcohol through for the same time, and there would be late night food from 11 o'clock through to 6 o'clock in the morning. And there would be films from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 11 o'clock in the evening. So having heard that, no, there won't be anything on Wednesday, we actually have a piece of paper submitted to you as part of the information, as part of the licence, saying, yes, there will. So we seem to have got some conundrums that perhaps ought to be clarified before we get any further. And it is this whole business of, and it was quite difficult for us to understand in our meeting yesterday, that the operators are applying for a licence that covers a wider period for longer times than their management plan will actually cover. And we say, okay, I can understand that you want a bigger authority so that you can be flexible. But how do we as an AONB know that it's not going to be from one extreme to the other? It's going to be the tighter period that you're talking about. Because for whatever reason, the AONB has not been included in this safety advisory group. Now, in some ways that's not surprising because we're not a safety organisation, but we are an organisation of which the Dorset Council is a partner. It is the second biggest partner in our AONB. And we can go on being repetitive, but Section 85 is quite clear that it does need to take everything into account. And we're quite happy to discuss these things, but we'd rather not be doing it 3 or 4 days before a committee meets or within 24 hours of a deadline to get consultation responses in. And we had, with the potential previous scheme that Lord Shaftesbury had, worked out most of these issues. We'd walked the site, we'd gone round with the team, we'd been there, we'd looked at the lighting, we'd considered the wildlife issues with them, we'd talked to them about the maximum number of signs, minimum number that they would need, maximum that could cause us problems, all sorts of things like that. And then that company folded. So His Lordship lost that operation, and it's good to see he's able to have an event that helps fund the restoration that he's doing of the historic park and house to ensure that one of the cultural assets of the AONB is being well sustained. But from an AONB perspective, from a partnership perspective, we also wish to see that it doesn't put key elements of the AONB at risk. The Dark Night Skies and the International Dark Sky Reserve status is crucial. And from our point of view, we think it can be resolved because, contrary to what some people may be thinking, we're not against these sort of events. The scale of this may be a lot bigger than the previous ones that we came to, and so one has to look to the organisers to ensure that things are handled well. Our concerns are with those that aren't attending, that have other interests in the key aspects of the AONB, and that we don't find that our International Dark Sky Reserve status is prejudiced because light pollution has increased rather than decreased. I think that's more than sufficient for me to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions?
No, I don't think I've got one.
No, but can I go back to the applicant, please? Just picking out for some of the information that's been said there about, obviously there has been a liaison between yourselves and the OMB. If we were minded to grant the licence, would that be something that you would continue a dialogue with going forward? I know you don't have to, but is it something that you would consider?
Absolutely, and the ecology report, I hope, makes plain that we are already fully committed to and engaged in planning the event so as to, what I'm going to use this phrase, use our best endeavours, which I appreciate does not mean not have the event, I'm afraid, but we will use our best endeavours, and absolutely we would. There is no suggestion that we wouldn't.
Mr. Burden, we recognise, and I think it's accepted, that the dialogue could have taken place sooner. It has now taken place, and it looks like it's a constructive communication between you and the organisers. You've made a number of points, particularly about lighting up, and it appears to have been taken on board, capping the festoons to do the downlighters, looking at the towers, the lighting there, and reducing the power of that down. You mentioned about the number of signs on the road, and I find that a little bit difficult because I'm sure they don't want to put up any more signs than they have to, because there's a cost, a work implication, a timescale, and everything in with those. What else can realistically be done that would make life easier for yourselves other than the licence not being granted?
I suspect that you're putting out there an extreme not being granted, what can we do? There's lots of things, I think, that can be done, and I don't wish to appear point scoring or anything, but it just seems that folks haven't actually understood what an AONB is about and the sort of concerns that we've got. Things have been written down, are heading in the right direction, but we seem to have got a little bit more meeting of minds to ensure. You may recall that some years ago we had a joint project with the Dorset AONB on reducing roadside clutter, and that led to some excellent work by our colleagues in the Dorset AONB on villages and what could be done in highways and villages. We concentrated on outside villages, and one of the things there was that we perceived from the various reports that were done was that it is the signage that takes away the feeling of being in somewhere special. Because signs are somewhere of towns that are where everybody lives, and people come out into the countryside to get away from it all, and therefore, if one can minimise signs, then that's it. And there is a tendency, with good reason, at events to have loads of signs, but they do tend to be out for quite a while in advance and then left up for a long time afterwards. So it's not for 5 days, that's the issue. It's trying to sustain that, understanding of the importance of the character and health of the countryside, and the visual aesthetics for the limited period of the event only.
I'm sure dialogue and communication will continue between you to try and reach a suitable solution and an ongoing plan that may assist in this year and in future years.
It would probably be helpful if the AONB could be involved in any debrief afterwards. And given that the licence will be going forward, and therefore we're not talking about just this year, we're talking about future years, that the AONB would be involved with the event management plan and therefore some linkage to the safety advisory group if that is the normal group that follows this.
Charles, do you want to come back on that one?
I mean, it's not a question, and if you would rather that I made a couple of points in my summing up, but there's a difficulty here, which, and I'm sorry to, well, I was about to say be the solicitor in the room, but there are two of us, so I'm about to be rude to your colleague. But there's a difficulty here. If we take as an example the event safety management plan and having an engagement in that, it's about the delivery of an event that is contextualized by 4 licensing objectives: public nuisance, public safety, protection of children from harm, and protection and prevention of crime and disorder. If we take as a microcosm of that the point that the road signage is a blight on the aesthetics of the countryside, is it respectfully really being suggested that we should, as it seems to me in the note I made to myself, compromise public safety in order to protect the aesthetic of the countryside? I'm really sorry, in the context of a licensing application, public safety trumps the aesthetic of the countryside. There's no dancing around it. I'm not saying it with any pleasure, but I am saying it to be straight with you. We can't attach conditions to a license that don't relate to the licensing objectives or the licensable activities. Are we happy for your colleague in Democratic Services to make a note that we will continue to fully and comprehensively engage with the association? Absolutely, no issue. Can you make that a condition on a license? No. I know part of the discussions yesterday was the idea of, as an example, providing the association with a desk or tent so that they could publicise the association. And I know that the gentleman made the point about not enough people know about the accreditation and so forth. And we will be very happy to engage with it in that way. And if of our attendees, people become enthused and interested in the activities of the association and all of the accreditations that they hold, which are all entirely commendable, we will be thrilled to support. But I'm stuck with saying to you, sounds like my closing speech now, so I apologise. It hasn't got anything to do with the licensing objectives. And forgive me for saying so, I take some succour from that point, because that's what your licensing officer tells you in your report. Some of these are unrelated. Most of them relate to planning. Very few of these points are related to licensing, I'm afraid. But to deal with it as a one-word answer to your, will we continue to engage? Absolutely. Do we know where we are? Yes. Do we know that there's a sensitivity to where we are? Absolutely. Could we wish we had engaged a little bit earlier? Absolutely. Will we continue to engage? Yes. But are we going to be in a position to offer the association the ability to direct, perhaps as a safety advisory group, how we conduct our activities to deliver to the licensing objectives? I'm afraid the blunt answer is no. Sorry. Forgive it.
Thank you. No apology needed. We are fully aware of what we need to take into account, and I believe that the 3 of us are fully aware of what we would need to take into account should it be a planning application. So we are, we know where the line's drawn, but it's appreciated that there are some residents out there that are not sure how it goes. Like I said, the gentleman's mentioned that perhaps the AONB should have been notified with this application, but licensing have no jurisdiction to notify. They are not a consultee in this, and like I said, and like you've quite rightly pointed out, and I would point out, a lot of it is down to planning, which again is not something that we're here to consider.
Your favourite subject?
No, it's not.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Burden at all, colleagues?
No, thank you.
Catherine, any questions?
No, thank you, no.
Darren?
No, thank you.
Do you have any questions? go backwards through the list. Mr. Burden, would you like to sum up and say anything else you would like to add that you haven't added or said already?
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask what training the councillors have had in AONB and in Section 85 of the Crow Act? Because it is an overarching piece of legislation which does apply to the council as a whole, and therefore, whilst you may feel that some of the issues for over 28-day use come under planning, this comes under 28 days, and therefore you are quite right that it is licensing. But saying that the AONB matters do not apply is not what the legislation says, I'm sorry. So I do ask and question how much has been followed through so that we're not finding ourselves in a situation where we're both, as it were, blinkered, but in different directions because of specific roles that we're in. It is a problem with this overarching legislation.
With regards to this committee, it is a licensing committee, so we have the licensing objectives. So they would need to touch on the licensing objectives. And in that respect, we take on board everything that you've said. It's not completely dismissed, but as in regards to the AONB and everything, all three of us do sit on planning. So we do have we have training. We can't go on planning without training, and that does touch on areas of outstanding natural beauty, English heritage, all manner of things. So we are aware. We're not, it's not that we have no clue, because we do.
Chair, I wasn't suggesting you didn't have a clue, so if that was the implication, I apologise. What I would say is that your committee does still have this obligation under Section 85, which I've pointed out to you. It is an overarching obligation to consider AONB matters. I agree that it is not a blanket which says you cannot do, but you...
I will, if I may, go to my licensing officer and I will ask them for their advice on this, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take this one if I may. The Licensing Act obviously was written after the Crow Act, so the people who wrote the Licensing Act would have been fully aware of all the overarching obligations. We are actually subject to a number of overarching obligations: crime and disorder, equalities. They all we have to have regard to them, but they are not quite the same as the licensing objectives. The licensing objectives, as set out in the Licensing Act, mean that we have to do everything with those in mind, and we're guided by those. So whilst we have to have regard to all these other things, this is what we have to focus on under the legislation that you are granting this licence on. Thank you.
Is that made clear?
I have heard what your licensing officer has said, and I don't disagree. What I am saying is that nationally, Crow Act is seen to apply to the authorities that are partners to AONB partnerships. And so you have your objectives, but there is also this additional matter to consider, the AONB and all that goes with it, which you wouldn't have to consider in an area outside the AONB. That's all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burden. Your comments are all noted. Thank you very much. I'm now going to go to Mr. Lithgow. Is there anything else you'd like to say or add that you haven't already said?
No, I think I've said all that I need to say. Thanks very much.
You want to say anything else?
No, thank you.
Mr. Phipps.
A lifetime, but I will be brief. I've got a couple of points to make. The first is just something that Joe just touched on with me when I was speaking, and it's a brief point and the papers contain good materials on this, but they're not points that I necessarily drew to your attention earlier. But the cultural significance of this event is not just very close to Joe's heart, but a point of some significant relevance when considering the cultural strategies of the authority and the points about culture and music, dancing, and so forth specifically within your licensing policy. And it was remiss of me not to just touch on that and bring that to your attention specifically earlier. The second point, just to deal with the outstanding natural beauty points in a nutshell, and to be clear about it, we are inviting you to have regard to the Crow Act. There is no attempt, never has been, never would have been, any attempt by us to say that that should be disregarded. What I say is, and sorry for the colloquialism, it doesn't trump the Licensing Act. It's a consideration. And I'm afraid, and your licensing officer made the point as eloquently as anything, it's perfectly proper you have regard to it. I'm inviting you to have regard to it. But paragraph 517 of your policy is candidly as clear as day. The requirement to promote the licensing objectives will be of paramount consideration. And that really then brings us down to what is, if I may say so, standing in the way of the grant of a license. There are a number of concerns that could fairly be characterized as planning concerns. There are a number of other concerns that could fairly be described as issues of merit outside of a licensing context, such as tranquility or the concerns about excess signage adversely impacting the vista and view of the countryside, all of which I hope that we have made abundantly clear that today we are sensitive to. But we are here to persuade you, and we invite you to conclude that the promotion of the licensing objectives is perfectly able to be satisfied by the grant of a license with the conditions that both environmental health and the police, with the finesse, if I can call it that, as to the prospective later hours next year incorporating the prior written authority of the prior written approval of the authority, that case is respectfully made plain in everything that's been said, I would hope today, but perhaps probably more importantly, everything that is in front of you in the context of the paperwork, and perhaps just as significantly, everything that hasn't been said, if I can call it that, by the responsible authorities who effectively say this is a good application. And the way in which licensing is set up, they say it, if you will, silently. And so I would invite you to grant the application, and just so we finish on the point and that we're very clear about it, we are entirely committed to continuing to engage with the association. We are sensitive to the locality in which we are positioned. We just can't offer to in any way undermine or fail to promote the licensing objectives in lieu of those considerations. We will, as I think I've said probably repeatedly, we will do our best, but we just can't offer to do more than that. And that's not said to be aggravating, it's just said to be straight. So I'd invite you to grant the application.
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. Catherine, anything from yourselves?
No, we haven't. I think everybody said everything that needed to be said, so no, nothing more from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we finish, has everybody had the chance to say what they would like? Is there anybody who would like to add anything else? Yeah. Laura, have we covered all the points we need to do? So.
Yes, Chairman, I think you have.
Thank you very much. The subcommittee will now consider its decision in private with the Democratic Services Officer in attendance and the legal advisor who may be called upon to offer legal guidance. The decision of the licensing subcommittee shall be communicated to the parties as soon as practicable and within 5 working days. There is a right of appeal. Any party who wishes to appeal the decision has 21 days from the date of receipt of this notice to submit an appeal to the Magistrates' Court. Thank you all for your time. this afternoon. It is appreciated. We will now go into... Sorry? Okay. Can I have a proposer for exempt, please? The seconder. Thank you. We will now go to exempt business to consider the decision.
If I just ask one question, and forgive me if I should know the answers. Do we wait for a decision today, or do you write to us in... It's a 5 working day.